Welcome to the Faithful Fathering Podcast. Again, this is Rick Wirtz, founder and president of Faithful Fathering. And as always, I want to direct you to our website, faithfulfathering.org. There you can find on the For Dads buttons resources that always complement these podcasts. But feel free to check that out as well. But here in studio with us today is still Mr. John Cantu. John is the pastor of Pneuma Church and has quite a journey. Tell us a little bit more about your education, if you will, and how when the Lord kind of got a hold of you and said, yes, you are going to be preaching.
Sure. So I've always been kind of a business-minded, entrepreneurial mindset. I have a business degree, a bachelor's in business. I have a few businesses that I run. I'm in real estate. We do a lot of real estate stuff, and so that's what I thought I was always going to be doing, like just business stuff. Whatever that looked like. Own a company and ministry was always in my heart. I've been a worship leader. I was a worship leader for many years. Mm-hmm. Music ministry was kind of my first love in ministry. Mm-hmm. So I thought, okay, well, if I ever do anything that's in ministry, that's probably what it'll be. And then I don't know, out of nowhere, I started to really just really love the word and really wanted to study it a lot more and teach it and preach. And so I started to preach a little bit more. Still not wanting anything to do with being a pastor, and never wanted to be a pastor. My wife never wanted to be a pastor's wife, right? We kind of even made like a pact, like, okay, before we get married, you're not going to be a pastor, right? I'm like, yeah, of course not. So I remember, God's calling really came in kind of the form of a burden. God just began to burden my heart for people and for my church. And so I still remember the day where I kind of broke the news to my wife. She was in our bedroom. She was getting ready. This was before we had kids. And I just told her, I said, babe, I need to talk to you. I need to tell you something. And this is already, this has kind of been in my heart for a while. I've been praying about it, kind of battling with it, kind of going back and forth with God. And I tell her, I think God is calling me to pastor. And her words exactly were, "Are you kidding me?" Right? She kind of looked me dead in the face. "Are you kidding me?" And it kind of went like that for a while. And I became an associate pastor before the lead pastor. And all during that time, my wife was, she wasn't in it yet. She wasn't 100% in it, because it's not what we kind of signed up for. I remember one day just telling God, Lord, I'm not gonna do this, without my wife, being on board, because I don't want the ministry to affect my family. My family's very important. Sure. And so I said, God, I've got a year before my dad retires and makes me the lead pastor. The church makes me the lead pastor. You've got to do something. Change my wife's heart, or find somebody else. And during that year's time, there was a really big transition, in the heart of my wife for the church. And not to say that my wife never loved the church or anything like that. It's just pastoral ministry is a very, very it's not for everybody. And but the Lord changed both of our hearts more and more. He changed mine first, I would say, and hers a little bit later. But both of us kind of are on the same page, and so that's the way that it happened. That's the pastoral calling happened.
The whole truth, nothing but the truth.
That's it.
And that's always, when we tell God what we're going to do,
exactly.
It's always a pretty good, which leads us well into this series, because at Coach Season, these teenage kids, a lot of times, they have all the answers.
Oh, yeah.
To the one or two questions they know. But do you remember some time with your dad? Obviously, your dad's a pastor as well, but when you kind of pushed the envelope a little bit, and kind of going through these ages 10 to 20, all of a sudden your dad realized that you weren't going to respond to the short answer. That now he's got to explain things to you, or maybe have a discussion with you. Yeah. You remember that transition when you had that man-to-man talk with your dad?
I remember moments of asking my dad, like, why is it a no? Like, why are you saying no to this? There was one season in particular. I was in a band, and I can't remember how old I was. I was maybe 13, 14 years old. And so I was in a band, and I was probably the youngest member of the band. I was keyboardists and lead vocals, and one of the members of the band, he wanted to kind of formalize everything, and so he makes this contract, right? This contract, and he's like, okay, let's get together, and this is going to be the stipulations of the contract and all that stuff. So it was a very formal agreement about forming this band, and I was excited, of course. I was like, okay, this is gonna be legit. We're gonna be traveling, and we're gonna be selling records, whatever. And then I get home and I show it to my dad because I need my dad to sign it, obviously. And he's like, I'm not gonna sign this, And I'm like, why are you stripping my dreams? It's basically that's how I took it. Like,
yeah,
there's no reason for you not to sign this other than you just don't want me to do this. That was kind of one of our first conversations where I won't say that I left feeling good about it. I left thinking, my dad doesn't want me to, be a successful, musician or whatever. That wasn't the case, obviously. His thing was like, you're too young. You don't need to be bound to a contract. You still have life. You still got other opportunities that can come your way. You don't want to. I didn't see it like that. I just was like, you're just stripping my dreams away. So that was kind of one of those moments where, it wasn't just, before it would have been, Dad, can I do this? No. Okay, maybe I'll throw a tantrum and that'll be it.
Yeah.
But this was something a little bit deeper, and so he had to explain it to me.
Yeah.
And eventually I came to understand what he was,
Sure.
His reasoning.
Yeah, and you're going to run into that when your girls start to cross that threshold into those years. That, your short answers aren't going to work anymore. And
Yeah.
the key then is to be engaged in your, to understand what your child's going through. So your dad was engaged and knew that this probably wasn't the right time for you to be with the older group in a band. And your dad's insight is to be honored, which obviously you did, however tough that might have been at that point in time. But any thought, any other, when you anticipate that with your girls, how do you anticipate handling that when all of a sudden your short answers aren't going to work? You sounds like you're already there a little bit, because girls are a little bit quicker than boys anyway. They're a lot smarter than we are. Yeah. But she's probably into that now, where you've got to sit down and discuss with her a little bit. Yeah.
Yes. Layla's definitely already there on a lot of things. She's still young enough to where, we can say, because I said so, and she'll kind of respect that. But there's some other things where, like you said earlier, she does kind of push the envelope because she really wants to know. And so, I probably sound naive saying this because I'm not there yet, but I've been trying to get ahead of that. I've been trying to kind of like we spoke previously on the teacher aspect. I'm trying to teach her bigger kind of principles so that she would learn the principles, and then later we can apply it to the specific situations. I don't know if that's going to work or not, but that's kind of what I'm doing to try to prepare for that. Like, I can go back and say, hey, remember when we had to talk about this? This is how it applies to this situation. So again, I don't know if that'll work, but that's kind of what.
Well, that's the sign of a good coach. The coach teaches the skills, and then you let them play the game, and you say, well, this is why we worked on this skill, because you didn't execute that skill properly, right? Yeah. And so, when we looked at that in the teacher season, you're looking at grounding your kids in the faith and the values you want to instill and prepare them for outside influences. In this coach season, we're now empowering them to own their faith, so that they can make good choices amid these conflicting influences, right? Yes. So you're absolutely on target there. What you're trying to do is stay ahead of it. All right. And so I applaud that. Now the marriage relationship is also under a new level of scrutiny. Their older eyes really paying attention and watching what's going on. Oh, yeah. How do you recall the interaction between your mom and dad, and some things that just really resonated, that's the kind of marriage I want to have, or maybe it's not? No.
Yeah, I mean, there's always one story that I tell on kind of on the opposite end of the spectrum. This was when we were living in Colorado, and again, kind of far from the Lord. My parents weren't in ministry, and my dad, one evening he was out late. He was out with some friends, and my mom was up till late, just kind of worried about him. We lived in the mountains, so we didn't have the best reception up there. So she would call his cell and he wouldn't answer. And so she's obviously, a worried wife. And seeing her worry, obviously I'm worrying. And so she thinks I'm asleep in the room, but I'm listening to her, kind of worried and calling my dad, not picking up the phone. And finally he comes home, and I hear their little exchange, and it's not pretty. And it's probably the very first time that I hear my parents actually fight like that out loud. I don't know, maybe they did it because they thought we were asleep. My sisters were asleep. I wasn't. And I remember my mom, saying a word to my dad that I won't repeat. It wasn't like a terrible word, but it was something that I'll say. She said the D word. She said the D word to my dad. She said, "Dang you," And for me, I was like, that's so unlike them. Like this is not my parents. My mom doesn't say the D word, And so she's walking out the door. I don't know where she's going, but I remember I chased her down, and I remember asking her, like, you would think any kid would say, are you leaving us? Are you leaving Dad? Where are you going? The question I asked her was, are you still saved? Like, do you still love Jesus? Right? Because hearing that type of language come out of her mouth, it wasn't normal for me. And so I say that's probably the worst experience that I have of my parents kind of fighting, but it's only because it was so not them. Every other memory I have of them, it was them loving each other, honoring each other, loving the Lord. And so that one moment really stood out to me just because it was so different. So I really think, I don't know that they love it when I tell that story, but I tell it pretty often at our church. But I think it's more of a testament of their godly character, because it was so out of place that it made me ask them the question, not are you leaving, but do you still love Jesus, right? And of course, they do, and they've given their lives to Jesus, and many years of their lives to serving. But that was
then
one.
You got to witness them work through a little bit of a valley in their communication, 100%. And then this whole chapter of life, I guess,
Yes.
in the mountains.
Yes.
But that's fascinating, because our children kind of say the opposite. They never did see us argue, and now they're both married. And they said, we don't know how to argue, so we're kind of messed up here.
Yeah.
But my story is always that I grew up in a violent alcoholic home, so the loudest and the curses always won the arguments. And my bride grew up in a very conservative home, and if voices got raised, the issue was tabled until everybody settled down. Okay. So for us, that communication gap was a huge issue early in our marriage.
Yeah.
Because I wanted to argue, and she wouldn't argue,
Yeah.
and I thought, well, how are we ever going to navigate through this? So,
Yeah.
Eventually we got through there, and we just have always handled those challenges in a more civil manner than the home I grew up in, for sure.
Yeah, yeah.
But that's one of the challenges we have, is that we have to be real. When the kids are in this coaching seat, and they're in the middle 10 years, 10 to 20, if you will, they really have a new level of scrutiny on that marriage relationship. They're watching you with more mature eyes,
Yes.
and just trying to see what you're really made of.
Yeah.
So as you prepare for that, those are good lessons to take away that you grew up with.
Yeah.
too.
Well, can I ask you a question?
Sure.
Is it just because I'm not quite here yet in the coach season? When there is an argument between husband and wife, because right now, whenever my wife and I want to hash it out, we kind of send the kids to the other room, so that they don't see it. Is there ever a point where, in your opinion, you think you should see this?
If it's not to do with discipline of the children,
Yeah.
because you don't ever want them to see disunity.
Yes,
right?
absolutely.
If there's a discipline issue, you take care of the discipline. If there's a difference in that, then you talk about that behind closed doors.
Yes.
But I don't think there's anything wrong with conflict in finances or a decision to be made. Those are things I think kids can see and should see to a large extent. And of course, again, I think that everything should be kept civil, period, whether it's behind closed doors or in front of the kids.
Yes.
But I do think it's important for the kids to see that conflict is real. Conflict is life.
Yeah.
And I think that in a bigger picture, I think that's one of the challenges we face, in general, whether it be in the church or in society, is we don't argue well.
Yeah.
That's what I've always respected the legal profession, because when you do debates in high school and in college, and when you're on that the legal law degree track, they'll debate an issue, and then they have to flip sides and debate the opposite side.
Yeah.
And so that teaches you to be sensitive to the other side and argue well, whether you agree or disagree. So unfortunately, there's just, what happens a lot of times, you just go to name calling, and the argument is never even addressed. You just go off on a tangent.
Right.
So, but I think that is healthy to a large degree.
Yes.
And again, there's always times, I think, Dad always has a gut feel, Mom does too, that if it's getting a little bit heated, then let's shut it down for now, we'll talk later. That
Yeah,
kind of thing.
okay.
That's
Awesome.
just now in this season, there are a lot of outside influences that start to come in. You talk about your bands, your exposure to band and what have you. Do you remember some specific instances where maybe an outside influence, maybe you had a friend that his parents were divorced, or you had a friend into drugs or something like that, there's an outside influence that you knew would not complement what you were standing for in your home?
Yeah. I mean, as a young boy in school, I mean, you get a lot of exposure to things of sexual things, whether it be a pornographic image. And I remember being in the boys' locker rooms and them passing around this a photo of naked women, and that was like the first time really being exposed to anything like that in a room where people were kind of like praising it. I go to church and it's like, hey, this stuff is, you want to keep your eyes from it, right? Be careful, little eyes, what you see. And then going to school, it's completely different. And so my dad did have some conversations with me about these things that I was starting to be exposed to, and just I think I've taken a lot of that as well, in teaching my older girl, like, these are things that you're going to be exposed to, but this is what Scripture says. This is the way that we deal with this. This is the way that God wants us to handle these things, and that's the way that my dad handled it with me.
And those are the things. Fortunately, your dad was a good coach, because it's not a matter that it's natural for a boy to be attracted to that. I think that's really what Adam was saying: bone to my bone, flesh to my flesh. You did a good job here, God. So women are beautiful.
Right.
But then you start to look at these photos and the images and the pornography and what have you. Well, it's all fantasy world. It's not a real relationship. Right. So to coach a young man through that, to understand that this is not a way to go. You want to stay very real, so you stay away from that stuff. There's a great, for younger kids, there's a great book out there called Good Pictures, Bad Pictures by, I think it's Jensen, I can't remember the author, but you can look that up. But from a very young age, it helps a child understand that this is not a good picture to be looking at.
Okay.
And so they know real quick what to avoid. Yes. But there's so many firsts in this coach season of fathering, that your kids are going to have their first friend turn against them. They're going to have their first love, their first heartbreak, their first pornographic image, and to really be geared up as a dad to be ready to face that head on. Then I think the real key is for children to always know that the home is a safe place to come ask any questions.
Yes.
They want to know that Dad is not going to come down on them. He's not going to, we're going to talk this through and see what we can do to navigate through this time together, because they've, as you've done well in the teacher season, they know that the home is a place to come with questions, and that's what we're about. So the challenge, of course, are all the appropriate boundaries and the things we set up through this season, and allowing them to have some input on those boundaries as well. I don't know, do you guys have a a set of rules, and then the consequences when those rules aren't being broke are going to be broken? Do you have those kind of things set up yet with the girls?
Oh yeah, I mean regarding TV, the shows that they watch, and I mean obviously these days you can't be too careful with the stuff that's on TV, even if it's being marketed to kids. I mean it's still some stuff that you don't want
Sure.
them seeing, and so
Good.
unfortunately you have to kind of sit down and watch it with them, and that's one of our rules. Like, hey, if we haven't seen this movie, if we haven't seen this show, I don't care if it's being marketed to you. We're gonna watch it together,
Good,
right?
good.
So that's something that we're pretty stringent on, if my girls, I mean, so far so good. They're pretty they listen well, but if they break the rule, then there are consequences. Hey, no TV, you can't watch TV for a week or whatever it is, or we're gonna take away something, some toy or whatever it is. There is always a consequence. Yeah.
Good. Well, and as you go into the coach season, those need to be even more clear.
Yeah.
And have good input from the child themselves as they get in their teens. Hey, what should the consequence be? That doesn't mean you have to go with that, but at least there's some dialogue,
Right.
and you can draw the lines as you need to. So,
Right.
Final question: Did you receive a blessing from your father? Did your father bless you?
When we got married.
No. Well, either married or any time during your life.
I've always felt like I've had my dad's blessing
Okay,
in many things.
Okay.
Many things that I've wanted to do. A long time I wanted to pursue music. He was all on board. He was my biggest, between he and my mom, he was my biggest supporter. His thing is obviously always honor God with whatever it is you want to do. So yeah, I mean, I always had his blessing. I'm trying to think of a time where I didn't. And the thing about me is I think my dad really raised me well, to the point where I never wanted to disappoint him.
Sure.
I wanted to make him proud. I still want to make him proud, and so I think, having that really kind of helped. And so anything that I want to do, I'm doing it with the way that he raised me, and so he's going to bless me. Yeah.
Did you mentioned your wedding? Was there a formal blessing over your wedding?
I mean, I did talk to them about it. I went to my mom first, and told her my plan, and then I told my dad, and yes, they blessed it. My dad married us. He gave the ceremony, so
Very cool.
yeah.
Good,
I always had that.
Good. Well, there's some folks that believe in a little bit more formal blessing, and in the book there's some tips for that. When the kids get of certain age, certain junctures, whether it's when they accept Christ or when they're going into high school, or maybe when they're graduating high school, going off to college, just separate, just a formal, hands-on blessing, letting them know that Dad is always there with them,
Yeah.
as you knew your dad
Yeah.
was. But that's something that has always been a part of in the book Raising a Modern Day Knight. Robert Lewis lays that out he talks about blessing over his sons,
Okay.
where he actually knights them into manhood, because there's it's not that now you're a man, it's just a marker on the journey toward manhood
Yeah.
that he lays out very well. So that's something I always recommend to dads with sons, is Raising a Modern Day Knight. And it's also good for dads with daughters, because they can start to see what a ceremony looks like. I always say that where young men always want to know that their dad loves them and believes in them. They know where they came from. They know who they are. But they also want to know they have what it takes to be a man.
Yeah.
And they need to hear that from their dad.
Yeah.
Right. Well, young ladies need to know that they're loved and they're cared for,
Right.
but they also need to know that they're worth fighting for.
Yeah.
And so they want to know that. So these are the things we can share with kids, particularly in this juncture, to really empower them, because kids that are indeed receive that blessing tend to be just more confident and more comfortable in their own skin. And it's a neat way to see the retreats and things we've run with fathers and daughters and fathers and sons. We
Yeah.
try to wrap up the retreat all that time. So any further thoughts or encouragement for lessons you learned as a teenage son and or as you go into the coach season?
I would say, I mean, just speaking from experience, it's never fun receiving the lessons. It's never fun receiving the the correction and the discipline. And so I always think of that saying, you know, this is going to hurt me more than it hurts you. And I don't think that's just in regards to, you know, spanking your kids. I think it's disciplining your kids. And, you know, it hurts. It does hurt me even when I'm disciplining my kids. And they're, you know, they're crying and all this stuff. And they're like, I'm the worst human being in the world. But it hurts me sometimes to discipline. And we're talking about, you know, baby stuff right now. Mm-hmm. I imagine when I get some teenagers on my hands, you know, the discipline is going to be a little bit more serious. But, you know, just from experience, whenever my dad disciplined me, coached me, I didn't like it in the moment, but it really molded me into a man that, you know, I can say that I'm proud of who I am, mm-hmm. and not because of anything that has to do with me, but because of, you know, the way that I was molded as a kid.
And when a 13-year-old Lila comes and wants to be a keyboardist and a lead vocalist for a bunch of 16-year-olds in a band, you got her answered.
Yes, you? I do. Yeah, I'll say, talk to Grandpa.
Well, dads, there you have it. Some good tips from John, and the reminders that during this coach season, it's not always easy, but our job is to, as we've done the teacher season well, to ground our kids in our faith and the values we want to instill and prepare them for outside influences. In this season, we're empowering them to own their faith so that they can make those good choices amid those conflicting influences. So be there, be engaged in your child's life, and be on top of those situations. That's the dad you're called to be, and that's the dad the next generation needs. God bless. Thank you, John. Appreciate
God bless you.
Thank you.